they're actually people that have a very strong sense of the community, and they're very dedicated, and I've actually never met people who are dedicated to what they do. So
hello and welcome to New Perspective አዲስቅኝት Media.
New Perspective አዲስቅኝት Media is a Toronto-based digital and broadcasting media outlet that focuses on immigration, literature and art, community and culture.
My name is Cole. I am a journalist, an activist and a writer. I live in Toronto. I've been in Toronto for almost 20 years. But I was born in Red Deer, Alberta, to parents who immigrated to Canada from Sierra Leone. So my parents are from Freetown. My ancestry is Creole, and I happen to be just learning more all the time, I guess, about the history of my community and our interesting history connected to Canada, which you and I were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and we met at the 127th anniversary of the Battle of Adwa. What's your knowledge about the Battle of Adwa and the impact of the Adwan victory?
Well, I'm just learning, thanks to being invited to be here today. I have known that Ethiopia fought against Italian imperial forces and were successful in defeating them in the Battle of Adwa. But I'm more learning about this all the time, I guess, speaking with people from Ethiopia who are teaching me and who are sharing more of the history with me as time goes on. But I understand this battle to be historic for many reasons, but one of which being that it's widely seen as being a victory for black people, generally speaking, a victory against imperialism broadly, not just for Ethiopian people, for African people, for black people, and showing the potential of people of different ethnic groups, people of different beliefs and backgrounds, nevertheless rising together to defeat an imperial force, and the lesson that gives us for history about what is actually possible despite the powerful forces that are oppressing people around the world, that it is actually possible for people to unite and to fight back and to liberate themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, the Battle of Adwa is not just a victory, it's a uniting force that bring all the black people around the world who lives under colonialism and slavery to come together and to fight for their rights. And it motivates so many activists, writers and freedom fighters in every part of the world. As you know, Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley and Martin Luther King and all of these giants were inspired and motivated by this victory.
Absolutely.
And do you see that Adwan victory is still play that role to bring the black community together in fighting against injustice and systemic racism and all that?
It would be a lot bigger of a lesson if it was taught in our schools, for example. It is not. So in Canada, we don't learn about this particular part of history. I didn't learn it growing up. So I think people have to know that history before it's possible for it to inform and inspire their actions. But for me, yes, I believe being here in what we call Canada, that there's still an anti-imperialist struggle happening every day, that we are on the territory of Indigenous peoples who were here millennia before any of us were here, and made it possible for us to be here by maintaining this land and these territories. And when we learn about the history of colonization here, of residential schools, of the theft of land of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which were then the Northwestern Mounted Police, and the way that everything was taken from Indigenous peoples, from First Nations, Métis and Inuit people, their language, their culture, their religious and spiritual practices, their ceremonies, the very land that their ancestors maintained was taken. Those things are not in the past to me. I am in solidarity today with indigenous people who are still struggling on their own territory and in their own land. And also we know as Black people that we are on these territories, but we are still also not enjoying the fruit of our labor, of our brilliance, of our, I guess what you would call like our ancestral inheritance to be free. How long have we fought? I come from the descendants of enslaved people. I am one, and we're still fighting. We're still fighting our liberation struggle. So I do think that we do need to learn our history, our collective histories, so that we know how broad, how long, how deep this struggle has been being waged, and what is actually possible for us. It's like, I'm still fighting today. I'm fighting against police brutality. Many of us are fighting. We're fighting against state violence. We're fighting to free our friends from jail. We're fighting against the system that makes us poor, that takes us into the child welfare system. We're still fighting. And these are all colonial structures. Everything established in Canada today is part of a colonial legacy and heritage that was not designed for us as Black people to survive and to flourish. So I do see the connection. I see it as being part of an ongoing struggle. And that's why it was like a great honor that I'm invited here today to be part of this and to speak.
በሳምንታዊ የሬዲዮ ፕሮግራማችን እንዲሁም በዩቲዩብ ቻናላችን ላይ ማስታወቂያ ለማስነገር
ጤና ይስጥልን። የአዲስ ቅኝት ኒው ፐርስፔክቲቭ አድማጮችና ተመልካቾች እንደምን ሰንብታችኋል? እንደምን አድራችኋል? ወይም እንደምን ውላችኋል? በያላችሁበት የዓለም አካባቢ እንደየሰዓታችሁ ማለት ነው። የአድዋ ድል በዓል እንግዲህ ትክክለኛው የአድዋ ድል ከነገ ወዲያ የካቲት 23 ቀን የሚከበረው በኢትዮጵያ። ነገር ግን በመላው ዓለም የሚኖሩ ኢትዮጵያውያን በታላቅ ድምቀት እያከበሩት ይገኛሉ። የዚህ በዓል በዚህ ድምቀት መከበር ለብዙዎች በጣም አስገራሚ ነው። ለምሳሌ በዩናይትድ ኪንግደም በለንደን በሰረገላ በአማረ በደመቀ ሁኔታ በለንደን ጎዳናዎች ላይ ነበር የተከበረውና ይሄ ብዙዎችን ትኩረት ስቧል፣ የብዙ ሚዲያዎችን ትኩረት ስቧል። የዳግማዊ ምኒልክ የልጅ ምናልባትም አምስተኛ ትውልድ ትመስለኛለች ልዕልት ሰብለ ወንጌል በክብር እንግድነት ተገኝታለች በዝግጅቱ ላይና ያ በጣም ትልቅ መነጋገሪያ ሆኖ አልፏል። በዚህ በምንኖርበት በቶሮንቶ ከተማም ደግሞ ባለፈው እሁድ ፌብሩዋሪ 26 ቀን እንደዚሁ በቶሮንቶና አካባቢ የሚኖሩ ኢትዮጵያውያን በነቂስ ወጥተው የአድዋ ድልን በታላቅ ክብር አክብረውት ውለዋል ማለት ነው። ቀደም ሲል መግቢያችን ላይ ያደመጣችሁት ትውልደ አፍሪካዊው ከሴራሊዮን የሚመዘዘው ታዋቂ አክቲቪስት ጸሐፊ እንደዚሁም ጋዜጠኛ ነው። ዴዝሞንድ ኮል ይባላል። ዴዝሞንድ ኮል ከሴራሊዮን እንግዲህ በጣም ረጅም ታሪክ ነው ያለው በአፍሪካ ውስጥ ከእንግሊዝ ነፃ የወጡ እዚህ ደግሞ ከካናዳ ያኔ አሁንም ያው እንግዲህ የእንግሊዝ ኮመንዌልዝ ነች። ለረጅም ዓመትም ደግሞ እንግሊዞች ከአሜሪካን ሀገር በእርስ በርስ ጦርነት ተሸንፈው ወደ ካናዳ ካፈገፈጉ በኋላ ካናዳ የእንግሊዝ ቅኝ ሆና ቀጥላለች። ከአሜሪካ ነፃ የወጡ ባሮች ወይም ሎያሊስት የሚባሉት በአብዛኛው ጌቶቻቸውን ተከትለው ወደ ካናዳ መጥተዋል እና የካናዳ የጥቁሮች ታሪክ የሚጀምረው በእርግጥ ቀደም ብሎ በ16ኛው ክፍለ ዘመንና ከዛም መጀመሪያ በኪውቤክ በኩል ከመጡት አውሮፓውያን ጋር በተያያዘ ነው። ግን በብዛት ወደ ካናዳ የመጡትና ኖቫ ስኮሻ የሚባለው የካናዳ ግዛት ውስጥ ደግሞ የሰፈሩት ከእርስ በርስ ጦርነቱ በኋላ አንደርግራውንድ ሬልሮድ በሚባለው እና ታላቋ ሃሪየት ቱብማን እና እሷን የመሳሰሉ አፍሪካን አሜሪካውያን ይመሩት በነበረው የነፃ የማውጣት ነፃ የወጡ ባሪዎችን ወይም ፍሪ ስሌቭስ የሚሏቸውን እያሾለኩ ከአሜሪካን
ወደ ካናዳ በማስረግ ነፃነታቸውን ጠብቀው እንዲኖሩ አድርገዋቸዋል። ነገር ግን ለረጅም ጊዜ በኖቫ ስኮሻ ከኖሩ በኋላ ደግሞ ድጋሚ ከእንግሊዝ ቅኝ ግዛቶች ነፃ የወጡ ባሮችን ባርነት ኦፊሻሊ ለመጀመሪያ ጊዜ በእንግሊዝ ምድር በሕግ ሲታገድ እነዛን ነፃ የወጡ ባሮች ሴራሊዮን ወደሚባለውና ምዕራብ አፍሪካ ጫፍ ወደሚገኘው ትንሽዬ ሀገር በጣም ውብ ሀገር ይወስዷቸዋል ማለት ነው። ከአሜሪካን ሀገር ደግሞ ነፃ የወጡ ባሮች ላይቤሪያ የሚባለው እዛው ሴራሊዮን አጠገብ በአትላንቲክ ባህር ዳርቻ ላይ ወደሚገኘው ሀገር ተወሰዱ። ብዙ ጊዜ ከአፍሪካ ቅኝ ያልተገዙ ሀገሮች ሁለት ናቸው፣ ላይቤሪያ እና ኢትዮጵያ ሲሉ ትሰማላችሁ ሰዎች። ላይቤሪያ ከአሜሪካን ነፃ የወጡ ባሮች የሰፈሩበትና በነዛ ሊብሬትድ በሆኑ ላይቤሪያ ራሱ ስሙ የሚያመለክተው ሊብሬሽንን ነው፣ ነፃ የወጡ ባሮች የመሰረቱት ሀገር ነው እንጂ ቅኝ ከመገዛት ጋር ካለመገዛት ጋር የሚያያዝ አይደለም። ኢትዮጵያ ግን ቅኝ ለመግዛትና ሉዓላዊነቷን ለመድፈር የመጣን አውሮፓዊ ኃይል በ1888 በኢትዮጵያውያን አቆጣጠር ወይም በ1896 በአድዋ ላይ በማያዳግም ታሪክ ጸሐፊው ሬይሞንድ ጆናስ እንደሚለው ዴፊኒቲቭሊ አሸንፋ ነፃነቷን ያረጋገጠች ሀገር በመሆኗ ኢትዮጵያ ብቸኛዋ በአፍሪካ ቅኝ ያልተገዛች ሀገር መሆኗ በወርቅ ቀለም የተጻፈ ነው። ይኸው ከኋላ እንደምታዩት ዳግማዊ አጼ ምኒልክ በአራዳ ጊዮርጊስ ወደ ሰሜን ፊቱን አድርጎ በተቀመጠበት አባዳኛው በተሰኘው ታላቁ ፈረስ ላይ ተቀምጦ ያለውን ሐውልት የቆመለት እንግዲህ ከዛ በኋላ ነው። ይህንን ሐውልት በይፋ ገልጠው የመረቁት ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴ በ1930 በአውሮፓውያን አቆጣጠር ከአልጋ ወራሽነት ወደ ንጉሠ ነገሥትነት ሲቀየሩና ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴ በሚል ዘውዳቸውን በደፉ ጊዜ ነው። በዛን ዕለት አውሮፓውያን ታላላቅ የፖለቲካ ሰዎች፣ ነገስታት፣ ልዑላን በተገኙበት ዝግጅት ላይ ነው ይሄ ሐውልት በይፋ ተከፍቶ የተመረቀው። ይሄ ሐውልት በጣም አስደናቂ ታሪክ አለው። ለሁለተኛ ጊዜ ከአድዋ በኋላ በ1936 ወይም በኢትዮጵያ በ1928 መጋቢት ወር ጣሊያን ኢትዮጵያን ዳግም ሲወርና በኋላም አዲስ አበባን ሲቆጣጠር ይህንን ሐውልት ነቅሎ ቆሻሻ ውስጥ ጥሎታል፣ አስቆፍሮ ነው የቀበረው። ነገር ግን ነፃነት ከተመለሰ በኋላ ቀዳማዊ ኃይለ ሥላሴ በድጋሚ ያንን ሐውልት ከተቀበረበት እንዲወጣ አድርገው በክብር ቦታው ላይ እንዲያርፍ አድርገዋል ማለት ነው። በአሁን ሰዓት እንግዲህ የምኒልክ አደባባይ በየዓመቱ የአድዋ ድል በዓል ሚያዝያ 23 ሲከበር መድፍ ተተኩሶ በይፋ ስራ ተዘግቶ ብሔራዊ በዓል ነው፣ በአዋጅ የጸና በዓል ነው። መድፍ ተተኩሶ አባት አርበኞች፣ የመንግስት ባለስልጣኖች፣ የሃይማኖት መሪዎች እና መላው ህዝብ በሚኒሊክ አደባባይ ወጥቶ አበባ ጉንጉን በማስቀመጥ በመታጀብ የሚያከብረው ልዩ በዓል ነበረ። ያ ድምቀቱ እንግዲህ በተለያየ ዘመን የተለያየ መልክ አለው። በአሁን ዘመን ደግሞ ዋና የፖለቲካ መከራከሪያ ሆኖ ይከበራል አይከበርም፣ በዚህ መንገድ ነው መከበር ያለበት፣ በዚያ መንገድ ነው በሚል ብዙ አለመግባባት የተከሰተበት ሆኗል። እንግዲህ ኢትዮጵያ ወዳና ፈቅዳ ህዝቧ ባይፈቅድም መሪዎቿ ወደውና ፈቅደው ባዘጋጁላት የቅኝ ግዛት መሰል ወይም ውስጣዊ ቅኝ ግዛትን በሚመስል ስርዓት ወይም አፓርታይድ ሲስተም የሚሉትም አሉ። በብሔርና በቋንቋ ላይ የተመሰረተ ስርዓት ውስጥ የምትተዳደር ብቸኛዋ፣ ምናልባትም ደቡብ አፍሪካ ከሁለተኛ ዓለም ጦርነት በኋላ በአፓርታይድ ውስጥ የነበረች ብቸኛ ሀገር ነች። ያንን በ1991 ተገላግላለች። ኢትዮጵያ ግን ከ1991 ከቀዝቃዛው ዓለም ጦርነት ማብቃት በኋላ ብቸኛዋ በእንዲህ ያለ አፓርታይድ በሚመስል ስርዓት ውስጥ የምትኖር ብቸኛዋ ሀገር ነች በዓለም ላይ እና ይሄ በፈጠረው ችግር ምክንያት የአድዋ ድል ይከበር አይከበር ራሱን የቻለ ፖለቲካዊ ጥያቄ ሆኗል ማለት ነው። ለማንኛውም ግን ኢትዮጵያውያን በተለይ በዲያስፖራ የምንኖር ኢትዮጵያውያን ይሄንን የኩራታችን ምንጭ የሆነ የነፃነታችን መነሻ የሆነ ለሁሉም የጥቁር ህዝቦች በካሪቢያን ላሉ በአሜሪካን በባርነት ለ400 ዓመታት ፍዳቸውን ሲበሉ ለነበሩ በአፍሪካ በቅኝ ግዛት ከዛም ቀደም ሲል በስሌቨሪ ፍዳቸውን በአውሮፓውያን ለቆጠሩ ጥቁሮች ሁሉ
የኩራት ምንጫቸው በመሆኑ እዚህ ተወልደው ያደጉ ሰከንድ ጄነሬሽን ሰርድ ጄነሬሽን ወጣቶች እንዳያችሁት ዴዝመንድ ኮልን ጨምሮ የአድዋ ድል የኩራት ምንጭ መሆኑን በአስረግጠው ይናገራሉ። እንደምታውቁት ብዙዎቻችን በስደት የወጣን ሰዎች በፖለቲካ ምክንያት ይሁን በኢኮኖሚ ምክንያት ከሀገራችን የወጣን ሰዎች በኢትዮጵያ በነበርን ጊዜ የማናቀውን የዘረኝነት ይሁን የቀለም ልዩነት ችግሮችን ለመጋፈጥ እንገደዳለን ማለት ነው በስደት ዓለም። ይሄ ሁኔታ በሚያጋጥመን ጊዜ መለስ ብለን ታሪካችንን እንድናስብና የአድዋ ጀግኖቻችን የአድዋ አባት አያቶቻችን ቅድመ አያቶቻችን ዋጋ ከፍለው ደም አጥንታቸውን ከስክሰው የሰጡንን ይሄንን ታላቅ ድል እንድናስብና እንድንኮራ ምክንያት ስለሆኑን እነዚህን ታላላቅ አርበኞች አባቶች ጦሩን የመሩት ሀገሩን የመሩት ለድል ያበቁትን ታላቁን ንጉሠ ነገሥት ዳግማዊ ምኒልክንና ባለቤታቸውን እቴጌ ጣይቱ ብጡልን ጨምሮ ሌሎቹን ታላላቅ አርበኞች የጦር መሪዎች እነ ደጃች ባልቻ ሳፎን እነ ራስ መንገሻ ስዩምን እነ አሉላ አባ ነጋን እነ ገበየው ጎራውን እና ሌሎች ተቆጥረው የማያልቁ ሰዎችን ለማሰብና ለማመስገን እንገደዳለን ማለት ነው። እና በዚህ በዲያስፖራ ያለች አንዲት ልጅ በወጣትነት እድሜ ላይ ያለች ወጣት ልጅ በዚሁ በዓል አከባበር ላይ ስለ አድዋ በዓል ያቀረበችው የራሷ ሪፍሌክሽን እና ፕሬዘንቴሽን አለ። እሱ ቆየት ብዬ አቀርብላችኋለሁ። ዴዝመንድ ኮል ግን በተለይ ጥቁሮች ላይ በዚህ ዘመን እየደረሰ ያለ የዘር መድሎ እንደምታውቁት በየዜና ማሰራጫውን በየጊዜው ይነገራል። ከጆርጅ ፍሎይድ በተለይ መገደል በኋላ ብላክ ላይቭስ ማተር የሚባለው እንቅስቃሴ በዓለም ላይ እንደ አዲስ ከሲቪል ራይት ሙቭመንት በኋላ ተቀጣጥሎ ብዙዎችን አንቀሳቅሷል። በዓለም ላይ ትልቅ እንቅስቃሴ ፈጥሯል እና በዚህ በካናዳም በጥቁሮች ላይ የሚደርስ መድሎን ለመቃወም ብዙዎች ነጮችም በነፃነት የሚያምኑ በፍሪደም የሚያምኑ በህግ የሚያምኑ ነጮችም የተለያየ ቀለም ያላቸው የተለያየ የባህልና ባክግራውንድ ያላቸው ሰዎች ሁሉ እንቅስቃሴውን ተቀላቅለው ለጥቁሮች መብት ቆመዋል። አሁን እንቅስቃሴ ቀጥሏል። በተለያየ ቦታ በስራ ላይ በትራንስፖርት ላይ የሚደረጉ ሞዴሎች በቤት ላይ በአእምሮ ጤና ላይ ለምሳሌ ጥቁሮች ለ400 ዓመት በካናዳ እና በአሜሪካን በባርነት በደረሰባቸው መከራና እንግልት ምክንያት በኑሮ ዝቅተኛ ሆነው እንዲኖሩ ተገደዋል። በቂ መኖሪያ ቤት የላቸውም። በቂ ጥሩ የሚባሉ ስራዎች ላይ አይመደቡም። ወንጀል እና አደንዛዥ እጽ ጋር በተያያዘ በአብዛኛው ይጠረጠራሉ። መኪናቸውን ፖሊስ አቁሞ ሊፈትሻቸዋል። አላስፈላጊ መንገላታትና መጉላላት ያደርስባቸዋል። ይሄ ሁሉ እንዲቀር ህግ አውጪውም ሆነ ህግ ተርጓሚው ሚዲያውም የሚችለውን ጥረት ቢያደርግም ችግሩ ግን ሙሉ በሙሉ ሊቀረፍ አልቻለም። ያልተቀረፈበት ዋናው ምክንያቱም ስርዓቱ ዲዛይን የተደረገው በኮሎኒያል ዘመን ስለሆነ ሲስተሚክ የሆነው ሬሲዝም ሲስተሚክ ሬሲዝም ይሉታል። ይሄ ችግር ባለመፈታቱ አሁንም ጥቁሮች እኛን ጨምሮ ማለት ነው ራሳችንንም የጥቁር ማህበረሰብ አካል ነን። ምንም እንኳን በባርነት ውስጥ በይፋ እንደሌላው አፍሪካዊና በቅኝ ግዛት ውስጥ በይፋ ባናልፍም በጥቁርነታችን ኢትዮጵያ በተደጋጋሚ ከጥቁር ህዝቦች ጋር እና ከአፍሪካውያን ወንድሞቻችን ጋር በብዙ መንገድ በሼር የምናደርገው አብረን ሰፈር የምናደርገው የምንታገለው እና መከራ የምንበላበት ብዙ ምክንያት ስላለ የእነሱ ችግር የኛም ነው የኛም ችግር የእነሱ ነው እና አድዋ እንዴት ነው ለሁሉም የጥቁር ህዝቦች በካናዳም በአሜሪካም ላሉ በሌላውም ዓለም ላሉ እንዴት ነው ዳግም የመንሻጤ ዳግም የመነሳሳት ዳግም የማሸነፍና ዳግም ተመልሶ በክብርና በነፃነት የመቆም ተምሳሌት ሊሆን የሚችለው የሚለው ጥያቄ መነጋገሪያ ሆኗል። ዴዝመንድ ኮል ታዋቂ ጸሐፊ ነው፣ አክቲቪስት ነው። ፖሊሶችን የጭካኔ ተግባር በይፋ በመቃወም በተላላቆች የካናዳ ሚዲያዎች ላይ እነ ቶሮንቶ ስታርን ጨምሮ በመጻፍና በመሟገት የሚታወቅ ጋዜጠኛና አክቲቪስት ነው እና
እሱ ይሄንን ጉዳይ አስመልክቶ በአድዋ ድል በዓል ቀን የተናገረውን ልጋብዛችሁና ተመልሰን እንገናኛለን። መልካም ቆይታ እንዲሆንላችሁ እመኛለሁ። አዲስ ቅኝትን እያደመጣችሁ እየተከታተላችሁ ላይክ፣ ሼር፣ ሰብስክራይብ ማድረግን አትርሱ። ለጓደኞቻችሁ ለዘመዶቻችሁ አድርሱ። ሱፐር ቻት እና ሱፐር ስቲከር ደግሞ ጀምረናል። በዛም ድጋፋችሁን ልታሳዩን ትችላላችሁ፣ ፍቅራችሁን ልትገልጹልን ትችላላችሁ። ምናልባትም ደግሞ በቀጥታ የሬዲዮ ስርጭታችን ላይ ሐሙስ ከ2 ፒኤም እስከ 4 ፒኤም የምናቀርባቸውን ዝግጅቶችን እንድትከታተሉን እና በዛ ላይ ያሏችሁን ሐሳቦች እንድታካፍሉን፣ የምናነሳቸውን ጉዳዮች እንድትጠቁሙን በዚህ አጋጣሚ ለማሳሰብ እወዳለሁ። ወደ ዴዝሞንድ ኮል ልውሰዳችሁና ተመልሰን እንገናኛለን። መልካም የአድዋ በዓል እንዲሆንላችሁ እመኛለሁ። ገዛኸኝ መኮንን ነኝ።
To be here is because I believe in connecting the struggles of our ancestors and the struggles of our history to the struggles that we are facing as Black people here in this country today. And so the first thing that's important for me to say today is that this celebration is about fighting against imperial power. It's about fighting against colonialism. It's about Black people of different backgrounds uniting for that purpose. And it would be wrong if I did not also say that we are in a country that has also been colonized. We are in a country where indigenous peoples of these lands who have been here for thousands and thousands of years are also part of an ongoing colonial struggle because they do not control the land or the resources of these territories. They do not control the laws of this land. The indigenous peoples, the First Nations, Métis and Inuit peoples of this land have had that taken away from them in an ongoing colonial struggle that continues to this day. And we learn more every day about the residential school system that Canada perpetrated against Indigenous peoples. We learn more about the history that has been tried to be hidden from all of us. But if we are in celebration against colonialism and against imperial forces, we have to acknowledge always the struggle, the ongoing struggle of Indigenous people in this country as well. It's very fashionable today to say a land acknowledgement and we open our official events at the City of Toronto and other places and we say we acknowledge the land that we are on. Acknowledgement is not enough. Acknowledgement is not justice. Acknowledgement is not reparation. So, just as I believe in reparation for Black people, I also believe in reconciliation, reparation, and land back and justice for Indigenous peoples. It is such an honor to be here today also because, yes, it's Black History Month. I have been thinking so much over the years about what Black History Month really even means for me. On the way here, I was in the subway. And maybe some of you have been in the subway system or you see on the buses. You see these posters and they have pictures of people who are being celebrated as Black community leaders. And one thing is common that pretty much all of the posters of people that I've seen, maybe not every single one, but pretty much all of them are dead Black people. There are not Black people who are living and fighting and struggling for liberation today, right now. And one of my big issues with Black History Month is that it is one of these celebrations that is put on almost to say whatever you were going through, Black people, that was in the past. That was then. Don't worry about now. But it was only last summer in this very city that the police chief came out and said, it's true. There are 2 reports that are out. Those reports are about use of force against black people, police brutality, about strip searches, about unnecessary stops of black people. And he was apologizing to us for that last summer, just 8 months ago. That is not history. That's what we are experiencing as black people now. That is what I am documenting in my work today. That is the modern ongoing struggle for all of us as black people trying to live and make our way in this city. And so the struggle of the past is today's struggle also. And if we are going to recognize that, we can't just talk about our history, we have to talk about our liberation today, our liberation struggle that is happening right now for our children and for the future generations that are going to come after us. I work in the area of journalism, and a lot of my work focuses on the police. A lot of my work, not all of my work, but I have spent a lot of the last many years writing about policing in Toronto and the harms that policing is doing in our communities. It is very exhausting work. It is sometimes feels hopeless, and yet I carry on because I too come from an ancestral past and struggle that I feel as being ongoing. I wish I had learned, yes. I wish I had learned what I'm about to tell you right now when I was in school, but they didn't teach us what I'm about to tell you. My ancestry, my family is from Sierra Leone. And for those of you who don't know, Sierra Leone is on the west coast of Africa, right on the Atlantic Ocean, next to Liberia. And Sierra Leone has a very distinct history, and a history that connects to this country and to my ancestry. The people that I am descended from, the Creole people, are people who returned to Sierra Leone after being emancipated. They won their freedom from enslavement, and many of them decided to go back to West Africa, hence the capital city where my parents were born, called Freetown. Some of those free enslaved people came through what is today called Nova Scotia. And many of them have the same last names that I have in my family. They could very much be my direct ancestors, but you know, when I was in school, we didn't learn about that history. So, just as my ancestors had to fight in order to be free, I don't believe that that struggle is over today. And I focus on policing so much because I see the harmful effect that policing has in our day-to-day lives. It is not a question for me about focusing on individual police officers and trying to make an argument whether they are good or bad. It's so much bigger than that. It is about a system of power that looks at us as black people walking down the street, driving in our car, our children going to school, and they see an opportunity to abuse us, to take advantage of us in a racist society that is going to say, well, they probably had it coming. They were probably up to something. They were probably breaking the law. And we are targeted as a result of this ongoing colonial mentality, which includes the enslavement of black people right where we are in what was then called Upper Canada, the enslavement of Indigenous people, the policing of those people. So where does our modern policing come from? One of the ideas of the modern police force in Canada is needing to drive Indigenous peoples off of their land if they didn't want to leave. They created something called the Northwestern Mounted Police. And today that is called the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And today, all the land struggles in British Columbia
for a pipeline project, for dam projects. Just down the road in 6 Nations of the Grand River, a huge development project, all trying to take more land from the original peoples of these territories and say, no, this is Canada now. Your customs and your traditions and your territory doesn't matter anymore. That is the history of where the police have come from. And in our case as black people, when we were enslaved on these lands, any black person was subject to being stopped wherever they were on these territories. That is one of the ways that modern policing evolved. So today, when we look on the news and we see that there's carding, right? There's the stopping of black people for no reason and taking our information. That has a history and a legacy going back to the time that we were not allowed to be free on this land because we were property of other people. So that is not just in the racist mind of one police officer or one bad individual or a few bad individuals. It is generations of systemic racism that is continuing to be practiced now that we are fighting against. And so, although the struggle is difficult, I believe that it's my inheritance as a black person to continue to fight for my own liberation and to fight for the liberation of every black person until all of us can say truly that we are free. I was in a class recently and we talked about Malcolm X, the incredible freedom fighter in the United States who was murdered while he was struggling for black liberation. Malcolm X said something in a speech that I think about a lot. As militant as a reputation as Malcolm X had, as much as he is remembered for being fierce and uncompromising in his ideas, Malcolm X nevertheless said that he believed that in America, black people had a chance for a revolution that was without blood, a bloodless revolution. He believed this despite growing up in a segregated America, growing up in an America where black people didn't have basic rights. He still believed that the struggle that he was waging could be won without a gun, without an army, without bloodshed. This is one of the reasons that he's one of my heroes, because I see the country that we live in today and I see how much black people are struggling in employment. I see how much black people are struggling through the immigration system and to reunite with our families if we are able to even get here, to bring our families here to also come be with us. And that struggle seems to be getting harder as time goes on. We're struggling and fighting against the police, and as I was mentioning, we're fighting against child welfare systems that more and more take black children out of our homes and away from us and put us into the state's control. Nevertheless, I believe what Malcolm X said. I believe that the struggle we are fighting can be won without a gun, without blood, without an army. That we can use our position, our social position, to rally with other black people and indeed with other oppressed groups all across these territories and with indigenous peoples, and to try and remake this country into something that actually cares for and serves all of us. And that's the struggle. I believe that that struggle is possible and that it doesn't have to be a violent struggle. But it is violence that we face when we are put in jail, when we are stopped, when we are denied the opportunity to use the gifts that we were given in this country, when we are discriminated against in the workplace. That's violence that we are facing. And so, how do we respond without returning that violence against the people who are doing it to us? I believe that we have to organize. And that is what I spend my time trying to do. So, if we believe that the money that is being spent in our city to criminalize us should instead be being used to serve us, we have to organize and fight for that. if we see, I mean, look at what is happening. We're seeing all of this stuff about violence in our streets, violence particularly on the Toronto transit system. And the only answer that the leadership has in this city is, you know what we need? We need more policing. We need more force. We need to intimidate people into coming on transit so that they are afraid and that they won't come on the system. We need to scare the bad people away. This doesn't work. They know it doesn't work. But they are only in power for short periods of time. And they're always thinking about the next election period. They're not thinking about how to invest in our communities for the next 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. We need to think like that if they're not going to. We need to fight a long-term struggle if the people in political office are not going to do so. And so, together with a group that I am a part of called the No Pride in Policing Coalition, that is what we are trying to do. I want to leave you with a challenging idea that I have been fighting for and that maybe many of you are hearing and other people talking about it. And maybe you hear this and you don't understand where it is coming from. People say that it is not even enough to reform the police, that they want to abolish the police, get rid of the system of policing entirely. I believe in this, of course, but I know a lot of people do not understand this idea, are skeptical of this idea, are afraid of this idea, maybe even think that this idea is damaging, that it is dangerous, that it will actually make our communities even less safe than they are now. And so I would like to put it to you like this, if you can imagine. What is it that a police officer does in our society that someone else cannot do? That is the question that I have for you. What is it that the police do that no one else are able to do in our communities? We have fought to get police out of our schools. You heard mentioned that I wrote a book. An entire chapter of my book, The Skin We're In, is about the struggle to get police officers out of our schools. Well, yes, there is violence in our schools. Yes, there are children who bring weapons to school. That's true. That is not going to be stopped by a police officer, though. The only thing that can address those things is supporting young people in our communities to make a different choice. But we have young people who don't have enough food to eat in the morning to go to school, but we don't fund breakfast programs in Toronto the way that we fund the police. We have young people who don't have anywhere to go after school is over, but we don't fund community services the way that we fund the police. Are the police going to babysit our children? Are the police going to give knowledge to our children? Are the police going to raise our children? Are the police going to teach our children how to love and care for each other? No, that's not their role. Their role is law enforcement. But we have given them so much power and so much authority that there is so little left for the things that we all actually need to thrive and to live. And so when we talk about abolishing the police, we do not mean getting rid of safety. We mean calling someone else when an incident happens. We mean calling somebody else to provide support and care rather than to bring force. I have been part of a group fighting for a young man who died in October. His name was Tarish Bobby Ramroop, and he was 32 years old. He was just about to turn 33. Bobby was on his balcony on October 13th, and he was throwing things off of the balcony because he was in mental health crisis. What he needed that day was support. He needed care. Instead, multiple Toronto police officers were sent to his apartment, and they surrounded his apartment for hours. They threatened that they were going to break into his apartment even though he was just there by himself in mental health crisis. Bobby's mom and the rest of his family rushed home when they heard what was happening. And instead of the police allowing this young man in crisis to speak to his mother, who begged over and over to speak with him, The police kept Bobby's family in the superintendent's office on the ground floor while he was upstairs alone on the 16th floor. And his family were in that office building when he finally tried to climb out the window and fell to his death. They sent the police. We had the biggest police response that was available that day. Multiple officers with helmets, officers with battering rams to knock the door down, officers on the roof with cables to rappel down. We had all the police that we needed, but we couldn't help a young man in mental health crisis because he didn't need any police. He needed care. He needed his mom. He needed services. He needed to go to the hospital. But we keep making this decision over and over and over. And when somebody like Bobby loses their life, we blame the victim. We say he should have listened to what the police said. We said he should have obeyed their commands. We have to change the way that we respond. And my argument is not that the police are evil people. My argument is that you do not send the police to a healthcare crisis. That is the point. And all the things that we are, yes, all the things that we are asking police to do, to be our nurse, to be our social worker, to go and wake up the person sleeping on the TTC, someone else can do that job. And they don't need a gun to do that job. They don't need the authority to take a life in order to do that job. And so what we are asking when we talk about abolition is reimagining the way that we respond and making better decisions, making better choices with the resources we have, and prioritizing care and love and concern for people over harm and punishment. As I continue to fight for my liberation as a Black person, I want to continue to join with people like you. I want us to learn about our history, and I want us to continue moving forward that history by recognizing that our liberation struggle together as Black people is far from over. So again, with the greatest of humility, I want to say thank you so very much for inviting me here.
እየተከታተላችሁ ያላችሁት የአዲስ ቅኝትን የሚዲያ አገልግሎት ነው። እኛ ነፃ የሐሳብ ልውውጥ እንዲኖር ከመገፋፋት መሳሳብ ከመራራቅ መቀራረብ እንዲፈጠር ጠንክረን እንሰራለን። እናንተ ላይክ፣ ሼር እና ሰብስክራይብ በማድረግ የማህበረሰብ ሚዲያ አጋርነታችሁን አረጋግጡ። አዲስ ቅኝት የሚዲያ አገልግሎት
እንግዲህ ቀደም ሲል የሰማችሁት ታዋቂውን ደራሲ ጋዜጠኛና አክቲቪስት ዴዝመንድ ኮልን ነበር። ዴዝመንድ ኮል በአድዋ 127ኛ የድል በዓል ላይ በቶሮንቶ በኢትዮጵያውያን እና በትውልደ ኢትዮጵያውያን እንዲሁም በኢትዮጵያ ወዳጆች መሃል ተገኝቶ ዘመኑ የሚጠይቀውን የትግል ጥሪ አቅርቧል። በዚህ ዘመን እንግዲህ በሁሉም ሀገር በሁሉም ቦታ ጥቁሮች ከፍተኛ ችግር ውስጥ ነው የሚኖሩት እና በዘመኑ ያሉትን ፈተናዎች ፍትህ አልባነት ሐሳብን በመግለጽ ነፃነት በመጠቀም በሰላማዊ መንገድና ጨዋነት በተሞላው መንገድ መቃወም ያስፈልጋል። ለመብት ለመቆም ግንባርን ማጠፍ አያስፈልግም ሲል ነው የቀሰቀሰው። እንደ ቀድሞቹ እንደነ ማልኮልም ኤክስ እንደነ ማርቲን ሉተር ኪንግ እና እንደ ሌሎቹ እንደነ ሮዛ ፓርክስ ሁሉ ዛሬም የገባንበትን የፍትህ እጦት የስርዓታዊ የሆነ መድሎ መቃወም አለብን። በፖሊስ የሚፈጸምን ወንጀልና ጭካኔ የተሞላው ተግባር በጥቁሮች ላይ በተለይ ያተኮረን ይሄንን ካለፈው የኮሎኒያል ዘመን ታሪክ የወረስነውን አሰራር ልንቃወም ይገባል፣ ልናስቆም ይገባል። ለዚህ ደግሞ የአድዋ መንፈስ የአድዋ ስፒሪት ሊያሰባስበን ይገባል የሚል ሐሳብ ነው ያቀረበው እና ይሄ በተለይ እሱ ያቀረበው ነገር እዚህ ላለ ነው ለጥቁሮች ለኢትዮጵያውያን እጅግ አስፈላጊ ነው። በሀገር ቤት ላሉት ወገኖቻችን ደግሞ በአምባገነንነት ላይ እንቢ ማለትን መሪዎች እና ስልጣን የተቆናጠጡ ጥቂት ብልጣብልጦች ብዙሃንን መጠቀሚያ በማድረግ
እንደፈለጋቸው ለማድረግ የሚያደርጉትን ጥረት አይሆንም በማለት መቃወም ያስፈልጋል። ትናንትና አባቶቻችን ለምንም ነገር ግንባራቸውን አያጥፉ፣ ሐሳባቸውን በጨዋነት በተሞላው መንገድ ተቃውሟቸውንም ሲገልጹ ነው የኖሩት። ሲያስፈልግም መጨረሻ ላይ ነፍጥ በማንሳት ታግለው ለነጻነታቸው ቆመዋል እና ዛሬ ደግሞ ሐሳብን ፊት ለፊት ለመግለጽ ጭቆናን እምቢ ለማለት መብትን ሊነጥቅ የሚፈልግን ማንኛውንም ጉልበተኛ ነኝ ባይ ነው አትችልም፣ በሞቴ ላይ ነው ህይወቴን ነው የምታጠፋው፣ ነጻነቴን ግን ልትቀማኝ አትችልም ማለት ነው ማለት በጣም ያስፈልጋል። በተለይ ይሄ ስፒክ ዘ ትሩዝ ቱ ፓወር የሚባለው ነገር እውነትን ለሚፈራው ወይም ኃይል አለኝ ብሎ ለሚያስበው ፊት ለፊት መንገርን ጋዜጠኞች ብቻ ሳይሆን ማንኛውም አይነት የህብረተሰብ ክፍል በዜግነት ያለው በሀገሩ በራሱ ክብርና ምልአት የሚሰማው በተለይ የአድዋ እና የነ ምኒልክ የነ ጣይቱ ስፒሪት ያለው ሁሉ ኖ ማለት ለነጻነቴ ማንኛውንም ዋጋ ከፍላለሁ ማለትን ማወቅ መቻል አለበት። አለዛ ትንሽ እምቢ ባለ ቁጥር እነሱ ካቴናቸውን ያጠበቁ የሚፈልጉት የጨመረ ጭቆናቸው እየሰፋ በደላቸው እየሰፋ ግፋቸው እየሰፋ ነው የሚሄደው እና ግፍን ግን በሰዓቱና በጊዜው ኖ መቆም አለበት ማለት ያንን የጭቆና እድሜ ያሳጥረዋል። አምባገነኖችን ማንም አይነካንም ባዮችን ባለጊዜዎችን ባለጠመንጃዎችን ባለገንዘቦችን ኖ ማለት ያስፈልጋል። ምክንያቱም አብዛኛው ሰው በድህነት አብዛኛው ሰው በመከራ ውስጥ ነው የሚኖረው። ስለዚህ እምቢ ካላላይ መከራው ጊዜ መርዘሙ አይቀርም። የአድዋ መንፈስ የሚያስተምረን ያንን ነው። ይህን ያህል ካልኳችሁ አዲስ ቅኝትን ተከታተሉ። ላይክ፣ ሼር፣ ሰብስክራይብ፣ ኮሜንት አድርጉ። በሱፐር ቻት አጋርነታችሁን አሳዩን። ከኛ ጋር ሁኑ። በሳምንት አንድ ቀን ሐሙስ በቶሮንቶ ሰዓት አቆጣጠር ከ2 PM እስከ 4 PM በቀጥታ የሬዲዮ ስርጭታችን የምናስተላልፋቸውን ዝግጅቶች መሰናዶች ተከታተሉ፣ ለሌሎችም አድርሱልን። በዩቲዩብ ቻናላችን ውስጥ ገብታችሁ መዝናኛ መረጃ ሰጪ ዝግጅቶቻችንን ተከታተሉ። ዌብሳይታችንን በመጎብኘት www.addisperspective.com በመጎብኘት ትኩስ ዜናዎችን፣ የመዝናኛ ጽሁፎችን እና ሌሎችንም መረጃዎችን እንድትጎበኙ በዚህ አጋጣሚ እንጋብዛችኋለን። አፓችንን ከፕሌይ ስቶር ላይ ዳውንሎድ በማድረግ በአፓችን ላይ ፖድካስታችንን መከታተል ትችላላችሁ። አሁን ደግሞ እያበለጸግነው ያለውን ማርኬት ፕሌስም እንግዲህ የተለያዩ ነገሮችን ልናቀርብበት እየተዘጋጀን ነው። በዛም ላይ በመግባት እንድትገበዩ በዚሁ አጋጣሚ ጥሪያችንን እናስተላልፋለን። ወደሚቀጥለው ወስዳችኋለሁ። የሚቀጥለው ዝግጅታችን በዛን ቀን ከዴዝመንድ ኮል በኋላ እዚህ ተወልዶ ካደጉ ወጣቶች መካከል አንዷ የሆነችው ርብቃ ግርማ ስለ አድዋ ያቀረበችው ዝግጅት ነው። እንግዲህ እነዚህ ወጣቶች በርብቃ እድሜ ላይ ያሉ ወጣቶች የአድዋን መንፈስ እንዴት ነው የሚገነዘቡት? ታሪኩ ለእነሱ ምንድን ነው? ምክንያቱም ጥቁሮች በአብዛኛው ከማንነታቸው እንዲለያዩ የተደረገው በባርነት ዘመንና በኮሎኒ ዘመን ከታሪካቸው እንዲፋቱ በማድረግ ነው። አየህ፣ ዋናው የኮሎኒያሊስቶች የቅኝ ገዢዎች እና የጨቋኞች ዋናው ስራቸው ህዝብን አንድን ባህል ማጥፋት፣ መደምሰስ፣ ህዝቡ ከባህሉ ከማንነቱ ከታሪኩ ጋር እንዳይተዋወቅ ማድረግ፣ ከዛ በኋላ የፈለጋቸውን ሐሳብ የፈለጋቸውን ነገር በዛ ህዝብ ላይ መጫን ነው። በዚህ ይሄው ነው ብሉፕሪንቱ። የሚከተሉት ያገዛዝ መንገድ ተመሳሳይ ነው። መከፋፈል፣ በቋንቋ በነገድ መከፋፈል፣ ከዛ በኋላ ባህሉን ታሪኩን መንጠቅ፣ ከዛ እነሱ የሚፈልጉትን አስተሳሰብና ርዕዮተ ዓለም ማስረጽ። ይሄ የተለመደና ጥንታዊ የሆነ የአምባገነኖችና የገዢዎች መንገድ ነው። ይሄንን እንግዲህ በስደት ዓለም የሚኖሩ ወጣቶች ደግሞ እንዴት ነው የሚገነዘቡት? ከዛ ለመውጣትስ የአድዋ መንፈስ ምን ያህል ያግዛቸዋል ለሚለውን እስቲ በርብቃ ፕሬዘንቴሽን አይተን ተመልሰን እንገናኛለን። መልካም ቆይታ።
አዲስቅኝት Media is a Toronto-based digital and broadcasting media outlet that focuses on immigration, literature and art, community and culture.
everybody, my name is Rebecca. I'm a grade 12 student, and today I'm going to be doing a presentation about Adwa, just a summary of events. I'm going to be speaking in English. It's my mother tongue, so it will be easier for me. As well as there are a lot of kids in the audience, and I think they would probably prefer it if I spoke English. So I'm just going to take it away. Alright, so firstly, some important things to know is when the War of Adwa the Battle of Adwa took place. So firstly, it took place on March 1st, 1896. So that is basically next week. Ethiopia is the only African country that was able to resist European colonization, and Italian interest in East Africa started in 1869. And so, I have a table of contents here, but since there's no screen, I'm just gonna keep going as well. Okay, so why did the Battle of Adwa take place? Or rather, the war? First of all, during the 18th and 19th century, there was this phenomenon called the Scramble for Africa. And so basically, European powers were racing to colonize African countries. And some main reasons for this was, firstly, resources. They lacked resources in their own countries and they needed natural resources, so they wanted to get it from African countries. Another reason was racial superiority. They had a superiority complex. They thought that they were racially better than other countries, specifically African countries, so they wanted to, that this motivated them to colonize. And lastly was nationalism. So there was rivalries between different countries and they wanted to show who was best. So they showed that by colonizing. And so why did Italy specifically want to invade Ethiopia? So I already mentioned that in 1869, Italy took a small port in the Red Sea. In 1887, Italy controlled some parts of Eritrea and Somaliland. And we know that these areas are close to Ethiopia in proximity. And after that, in the Battle of Galai, Ethiopian troops ambushed and destroyed the Italian column. And so there were disputes between the Ethiopians and the Italians. So this resulted in them having to settle these disputes, and they signed a treaty called the Treaty of Wuchal. Basically, in this treaty, there was conditions, and both these conditions were written in Italian and they were written in Amharic. And the interesting thing to note here is that the Italian version of this treaty stated that Ethiopia is a colony of Italy, and so this ensued war, and so this is why the battle took place. I've also written here that, notably, Russia was the only European power that recognized Ethiopia's independence, and this is pretty important because Russia supported Ethiopia in terms of ammunition. So, there's that. Okay, so nextly, how did it occur? I put some important figures. My first one is General Oreste Baratieri. Not a Habesha name, he's Italian. I have pictures here. He has if you want to search him up later, he has a large mustache. And he's the Italian commander of the army. He was the head, and so he led the Italians in the war. Menelik II, I believe he's over there. He was the emperor of Ethiopia, and he led us to the victory. Taitu Betul, she's also over there. She is the wife of Menelik. She is exceptionally intelligent. She was a military strategist. And because of that, So they were going to negotiate the Ethiopians were going to negotiate with the Italians on certain terms. And she opposed that completely. She was like, no, go to negotiations, we're going to settle this through war. And that's why there was a war. And I've written here that her presence also helped us be victorious. Lastly, I've included Ras Alula. Some of you guys may know him. He was the head general of the Ethiopian army. So if you guys want to take a note of this, General Aroste Baratieri, the mustache guy, he's the Italian head commander. And Rasabula, if you search him up, he has this nice military crown. It's made of hair, I think. And he was the head general of the Ethiopian army. Alrighty, so we're finally going into the timeline of events. So, 1894, the war officially broke out. In 1895, Menelik assembled a massive army. This army was huge. There was 200,000 men. And some people might think that we just had spears. We also had rifles, and I already stated that they were supplied by the Russian, by Russia. Another interesting note is that Menelik led the Italians to believe that Ethiopia was an undeveloped country and that it lacked the material means to fight. And this is very important, as this is the reason why the Italians lost. They were outnumbered. There was only 6,000 Italian troops in comparison to around 200,000 Ethiopian troops. So they did not have a good time. Alrighty, so 1896 is the year of the Battle of Adwa. I already stated that the Ethiopian army had 200,000 troops. General Baratieri, the mustache guy, he found out about this and he wanted to retreat, obviously. And retreating, unfortunately, wasn't an option because the Prime Minister did not allow him to retreat. That would look bad. And so they went on with the fighting. And so the Italian troops were divided into 3 brigades. That's just a fancy word for groups. And the problem with these 3 groups is that they had, obviously the military had maps. These maps were outdated. So the groups were too far apart. And so what happened was, one brigade would come and they were attacking the army. Then that brigade was completely annihilated. And so the second brigade came and they were trying to give backup. And then that brigade also became annihilated. And then the third one tried to retreat and then they couldn't. So the whole Italian army was destroyed. And the rest retreated to Eritrea. And that is basically it. And so lastly, we're going to look at the outcome of the war. So I have some statistics here. It would have been helpful if I had a screen, but generally, the Italians, there were 18,000. Excuse me, I said 6,000 before, it was actually 18,000, so a little more. But much less than the Ethiopians, which was 200,000. I've noted here that Ethiopia only lost 10% of their men, whereas Italy lost 60%, so clearly we were victorious. Alrighty, and so lastly, I'm just gonna continue on this topic of the outcome of the war. The victory of Adwa can be interpreted in many different ways. Most people saw it as a way to discredit the Italians' military strength because they lost. Additionally, some found that since the Ethiopians won, that they might not truly be black. So some people thought that way as well. Another outcome of this war was, this is just a sort of historical event. In Italy, there were mass riots and protests because they lost the war. It was really embarrassing, and so a lot of people were unhappy. I'd like to conclude that the victory of Adwa, this is very important to Ethiopian peoples because this granted our freedom, and in general, these freedoms include our freedom to speak any native Ethiopian language. Ethiopia has many languages: Amharic, Tigrinya, Guraginya, Oromo, etc. And we can speak these languages because we aren't colonized. Ethiopia is also rich in natural and human resources, And we can use these resources because there isn't a higher power that is going to take advantage of us. We can practice, Ethiopia, we're Christian, Muslim, there's many religions, but we are a religious country, and we can practice our faith thanks to being free, and we can develop and promote our culture because of that as well. Ethiopians, we are prideful of our nation. We never feel like we are below any race or country because we weren't colonized. I think that's a very important thing to note. We sometimes forget why we're so prideful. It's because we weren't colonized. Because we have that freedom and we've kept that. I had some interesting music videos that I was gonna play. But for the kids at home, ask your parents to to play for you guys Teddy Afro Tukurso. It's an amazing music video. I always feel super prideful when I watch it. And ask your children how they feel when they watch it. That was my first music video. My second one is called Adwa. And it's sung by Gigi. It's very beautiful. It's very different from Teddy Afro's Tukurso. It's much more somber in its atmosphere. And I'd like you guys to show these songs to your children so that they can enjoy them. Okay, so other than that, I'm
እንግዲህ ስትከታተሏት የነበራችሁት ርብቃ ግርማን ነው። የሁለተኛ ትውልድ ኢትዮ ካናዳዊ ነች። በዚሁ ነው ተወልዳ ያደገችው። ግን ስለ አድዋም ሆነ ስለ ቤተሰቦቿ ስለ ወላጆቿ ታሪክና ባህል ጠንቅቃ ታውቃለች። አድዋ በመላው ጥቁሮች ላይ በወጣቶችም በአዛውንቶችም ባሉትም በነበሩትም ላይ ያለውን ተጽዕኖ በሚገባ ተረድታለች. And as we celebrating the 127 anniversary of the victory of the Adwan victory here in Toronto and all over the world, we are discussing about what could be the impact of this great victory over colonizers 127 years back. It's still active, it's still impactful, and it affects the life of African diaspora all over North America and in Europe, and they are still discussing about how can they refresh and revise the value of that victory, where Ethiopians from all walks of life and from all background, from all language group, from all ethnic group came together and say no to colonialism, so say no to any aggression, foreign aggression. So before that you were watching Desmond Cole, the great writer, activist, and journalist, who gave moving speech as a keynote speaker on the Adwan victory celebration here in Toronto. And we will continue discussing this issue in our live radio transmission on Thursday. We are inviting you to join us on our live transmission. አዲስቅኝት New Perspective media is a bilingual media based in Toronto and serving Ethiopians and all Canadians and Africans in different entertaining and informative issues. So we are happy that you are following us, watching us, and commenting us and supporting us. Thank you very much. That's all we have for today. We will see you next time with another edition of our program. My name is Gazahan Mekonnen, and the producer and host of this show. I'll see you next time. Have a great day.
አዲስ ቅኝት የሚዲያ አገልግሎት ነው። አዲስ ቅኝት በዩቲዩብ፣ በፌስቡክ፣ በቴሌግራም፣ በዋትስአፕ www.addisperspective.com እንዲሁም ሐሙስ ከ2 PM እስከ 4 PM በቀጥታ የሬዲዮ ስርጭት ከዳንኤል ስፔክትረም ስቱዲዮ በሬዲዮ ሬጀንት ላይ ታገኙናላችሁ። ቻናላችንን ሰብስክራይብ አድርጉና ዝግጅቶቻችንን አዳምጡ። አዲስ ቅኝት የሚዲያ አገልግሎት